application through Philadelphia. And then specifically, we're going to chat about how that's currently tying into the new Philadelphia Eclipse system, and just give you updates on our end, what we're seeing, and how this stuff is now being utilized heading in, with this new crisis. First we'll hop into our weekly updates. So this is the latest and greatest we know from L&I and the city agencies regarding everything around construction happening. So right now the city, obviously issued that any permits that were issued after 3/20/2020, that they can't start construction, but they're working on how to handle that. I've been asked over and over why they believe that is, and I personally just think it has to do with bandwidth that the city has currently for dealing with construction sites. So they're actively working on how to handle that. Right now, the construction curfew has been lifted. If you previously are aware, you were only able to build from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. on job sites. That's been lifted now for every job site other than 1 and 2 family construction sites.
Including weekends now, I believe, right?
Including weekends. So, if you have a triplex and above, essentially, there's really no restrictions other than maintaining the current noise ordinance. You can't be loud and things like that. Another update we have, better for worse, the city is increasing their L&I fees to 3.5% versus the 5% that they previously mentioned. Another question we keep getting is the ZBA and CDR, meetings. The city claims they're still working on getting those operational. They're looking at possibly expanding the definition of emergency repairs to include MEP, sprinkler, and fire alarm systems. So that's something to keep an eye on for any projects in motion. There's still no movement on projects that require underpinning or demos next to occupied structures. I know we personally have clients that are waiting for us to demo projects, and unfortunately, if they're attached right now to an occupied structure, it's not allowed. So there is cases where if you do have an unoccupied structure next to you, you can submit to L&I, and they're reviewing it on a case-by-case basis. The last piece, probably one of the bigger ones, is the OPA is still closed. We've been told that there's an issue with technology and allowing the people that work over at OPA to work from home. They are doing mailings or checking email, but do not mail things into the OPA at the moment. Hold on to all abatement paperwork at the moment. Rach and Adam, do you want to expand on that?
I will just quickly, they're not like, we're advising people that say, bought a house with an abatement to not submit that form yet. We typically, when things are fine, we typically bring those right into OPA, hand deliver them directly, but they're not going to penalize anybody for issues with their own system. So just know, hold on, they will figure out a way to refund you and implement it correctly.
Great. Cool. And again, I just want to say, if you have any questions throughout this, we're going to try and incorporate some questions during. If you have them, just post them in the Zoom chat, or if you're on Facebook watching this, you can also just post in the comments section and we'll get to them as well. But without further ado, let's get into it. And I think we're starting off here with Scott about the different types of permits that are currently happening.
Yeah, we're going to start fairly broad and start to dive into issues and just kind of all of the minute details of things. Just real quick overview, different types of permits. Top 3 really: zoning permits, building permits, right-of-way permits. Those are probably the most used permits within the city. Other permits also include demolition permits, make safe permits, sign permits, temporary use permits. All have their own intricacies in how they're supposed to be filed and what the requirements are. But we're really going to dive into mainly zoning and building permits today, but can obviously take questions on the other ones if people have them. So, Frank.
Cool.
Zoning permits. Again, pretty general. When do you need zoning permits? Any new buildings, any additions to the building size? Specifically, if you're increasing or changing the envelope of the building, the exterior walls of the building, increasing specifically, you will need a zoning permit. Any new decks or fences also needs a permit from zoning. Roof decks are included in that. So if you're doing a new roof deck, this is a big thing people don't usually do. You have to pull a zoning permit as well as a building permit for that. Any change in use of the building, if you're saying taking an office building and renovating it to make it apartments, change in use. If you're going from 3 units to 4 units, change in use. All of those things require, regardless if it's by right or there's a variance, they need a permit attached. And also one people don't 100% know about is also any new parking spaces also require a zoning permit to make sure that they qualify as legal, because parking is something that is not allowed specifically in every zoning district. This is just a really quick overview of different requirements for a zoning permit. Zoning drawing showing compliance, typically performed by an architect or an engineer. Proof of ownership, specifically if that ownership has changed, they want to make sure you own the property, obviously. And then prerequisite approvals is a quick list of the main prereqs that you could get hit with from a zoning standpoint, which we will dive into a little bit after. But the prerequisite approvals are really the thing that people kind of need to be aware of to make sure, because they can extend your timeline quite significantly. Let's go to building permits. Again, a lot of similar things, types of building permits: new construction, addition, alteration. Also, if you're looking to get a certificate of occupancy permit, also a type of building permit specifically around use changes. So if you have a vacant building and you want to put 10 offices in that building and the rooms are already there, you still are going to need to submit a drawing showing that it meets the requirements for that use of your building. And that's something that we run into a lot, and that's where a lot of violations come from, to be honest, is kind of that unknown that people aren't aware of. Requirements specifically around building permits: architectural and structural, if required, plans prepared by a registered architect, an engineer, and PA, potentially engineering, mechanical, electrical, plumbing as well, and fire alarm. Project specific if that's required though. Energy compliance forms, special inspection forms, zoning, approved zoning permits and drawings, structural design criteria, waste hauler form, proof of ownership, and any additional prerequisite approvals. So it ends up being quite the list from a form standpoint. And there's a lot of signatures, a lot of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and a lot of little nitty-gritty information that's needed to submit these actual building
You can
permits.
see why, it's helpful to have a project manager that knows what they're doing on these, because a lot of times people get tripped up and they don't know why, and it's because there's about 8 or 9 things you got to be looking at all times.
Yeah, I usually make that's where I make fun of Scott. He's got like inch stack pieces of paper or packs of papers that go down to the city, and now it's all digital, and we'll get to that here in a little bit too, which is
Yeah, and typically the old way of doing things, if you're submitting by paper, or you used to, it used to be 3 sets of everything. So it's all these things times 3.
Yep.
That was needed. So it would kill a lot of trees.
So we're saving trees moving forward. Cool.
Yeah, so I'm going to get into some of the prerequisites, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, and there's some intricacies in this. These are things that are very project specific. And generally, there's a thing that says prerequisites if required on all the building permit applications. Streets approvals is something that's fairly common. Any encroachment of construction within the right of way, so anything that encroaches into a sidewalk, stairs, bay projection, egress well, anything of that nature needs to be approved by the streets department for compliance. Curb cuts, same sort of thing. There's
Gotcha.
varying levels of approvals in that.
Just to clarify that, so if I take the sidewalk and I imagine an imaginary wall heading up to the sky, it's essentially anything that touches that imaginary line
Anything that goes beyond that line.
goes beyond that line into the sidewalk.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So there's specific requirements on what you're permitted, like stairs can encroach, bays can encroach, egress wells can encroach, but there's specific standards that they allow that they want to make sure you hit compliance of, so you don't build, a 20-step staircase in the sidewalk and take the whole sidewalk. And then again, those various levels of approval within streets: checklist 1, checklist 2, ADA ramp approvals, PennDOT HOP approvals. Those are all different streets approvals with the varying levels of review, with it typically going up as you go down that list. Once you hit checklist 2 and ADA ramp approvals, you're looking usually around a 3-month streets review time, just start to finish with a registered civil engineer. So that usually is a big one because it has time and cost implications around your permitting. Philadelphia Water Department approvals. These two are the main big ones. All new construction require PWD approvals to some nature, as well as any new utility services that are going into an addition or a renovation. PWD has changed these things probably cyclically. On like every 6 months they make new things you have to do, and it's changed so many times. But as of right now, this is kind of their process. And one of the big things they implemented was a utility plan approval. So you need to basically draw utility lines that kind of are shown into your building with their sizes, flow rates, connection locations within the building. That needs to be approved by the water department. And then you can submit your building plan after they say this 6-inch pipe looks great at this location. Is basically the extent of that. 537 approvals, ERSA approvals, stormwater technical approvals, green roof approvals. Again, varying levels. If your project's over 5,000 square feet of earth disturbance, 15,000 square feet of earth disturbance, those approvals need to be done before you submit your building permits.
Yeah, I would just state on this pro tip, you'll see it just so we can kind of go over it once, because it goes pretty much with everything else we're going to see, and that's that they're not going to basically allow you to receive any of these permits without being fully up to date on your taxes and actually having a tax clearance certificate. So the city doesn't, the city wants to be paid in full before it kind of provides you one of these discretionary type things. With that being said, we are helping people like in this crisis right now, because there are certain things that just can't be fixed that are kind of small, get what they're calling like a temporary tax clearance. So maybe you were appealing waivers of penalties or interest on your BERT or something. That's something that they're handling right now. So we can help out with that if need be, but typically got to have those clearances in order for them to submit and allow you to have stuff further.
And also have to make sure that any violations on your property are resolved. Depending on what the violation is, if some of the changes that you're going to be making, say you're going to be completely rehabbing the interior, if you speak with the examiner or the inspector, sometimes that can get resolved, down the road once you do the construction. But generally, at least you want to touch base with the inspector and get these wiped out, or at least work through a plan so that you can move forward.
Awesome. Cool. More prerequisites.
The fun doesn't stop.
This
Brian.
is all before you submit building permits, right? I just want to clarify.
Fun doesn't stop. Correct.
Oh, I know the Fairmount Park one. I remember that one. That's a good one.
So, Brian's jumping ahead here, but planning commission approvals between zoning and building are required at different levels. Most of them are counter reviews, like over the counter. You go into planning commission typically. They take a look at your plans and they verify that you're kind of fitting their requirements for the zoning code. And then also CDR review for any projects that are over 50 units or 50,000 square feet. Also, obviously, is a much more intensive planning commission review, but they would also need to review that. Any lot line relocations, any sort of that stuff, anything that's to do with the lot and kind of how it touches the streets, they want to put their eyes on. Survey district approvals required by the planning commission for the approval of lot line relocations. This is a prereq to the prereq, which is really fun, but also very important. So typically the civil engineer who's drawn up your lot line relocations will get this approval with the survey district. Historical approvals, any overlay or designated building, pretty straightforward, kind of work through there. The two different levels of review are staff and the commission review, which is a much longer process. Fairmount Park, subdivisions, 3 or more properties. Again, it's just street tree approval, but it's a separate division that specifically handles that. Art commission required for public art, signs, which is a separate commission similar to historical in nature. And then obviously OPA approvals as well, which is needed at the zoning level for subdivisions, consolidations, PUDs, condos. Basically anything that involves a change of address is going to have to be done before you receive any of those permits.
Yep. And all of this, like which things that you may be required for, say you don't know if you're a historic building or art commission for a sign, that stuff is all, you're able to find that online, whether you've been designated, you're in an overlay or you've been designated as a historic building.
All right. Types of licenses, certifications, and the abatement.
Yeah, so this is just, again, kind of more of a list. We'll go into detail more of the popular ones, but commercial activity license, needed in most cases, obviously dealing with either personal or in a company or LLC ownership. You need a commercial activity license in order to receive any of the permits that we were just talking about, or licenses, including housing rental licenses, certificates of rental suitability. All of those are required for rental units, and we'll get into that in the next slide. We have property sales certifications. We'll go into those in some more detail. Typically required for a lender, as it mentions. It's really the best way to certify the last registered use of a property. Rachel will get into that in a little bit, what we mean by that. And then, of course, the property tax abatements, which are, probably the most asked question we get. And believe it or not, though so heavily asked and so heavily researched, a lot of people don't know there are 3 types of property tax abatements available and permits that go with those, which we'll get into some more detail about.
Cool.
Okay, so we're jumping into abatements first because we get asked that the most. There's 3, as Adam mentioned, and all this is on OPA's website. So if you're unsure, besides this slide, you can find it on the website.
Yeah. And I actually think, Rachel, when you go, wouldn't you say 1 is probably the one that's least known?
Yeah, I would say people don't know about the development abatement, which is for new construction or improvements to real estate. Basically, it's a 30-month abatement that freezes the property taxes during construction. I'm sure that most people who are doing larger projects utilize this, but it's good in the event that you have a low basis to start with, you want to freeze it, or if it's going to, again, span over a number of years in which the property taxes could go up. It must be applied for within 60 days of the building permit issuance date. Just to point out, like, none of these get applied for after you're finished your project. None of them. That is not a trigger. So that's really important, 60 days. And then the abatement starts on the first day of the month after the building permit is issued by L&I. So obviously it's May now. If we were to apply for it, it would then begin in the event that OPA was open in June. So that's really important. Your building permit issuance date is on the top right corner of your building permit. The second one is the abatement for new construction. This is for industrial and commercial properties and residential. It's a 10-year tax abatement currently, up until, as of right now, December 31st, 2020. I know there is some legislation that Councilman Heenan introduced to extend the implementation date for another year, so December 31, 2021. It hasn't gone to committee yet or any of that, so we'll keep that in mind. But essentially, the way it stands now is they're going to be reducing the abatement for new construction only, new construction residential only, to basically a 5.5-year abatement. Again, we'll follow that legislation. This one also has to be applied for within 60 days of the building permit issuance date. So the first 2, the development abatement and the new construction abatement, have to be applied for within 60 days. And the abatement starts on July 1st after the certification that the improvements are complete. And you need a CO. So as Scott mentioned, it's really important that the CO follows all this, and that's part of the building permit. The last one is the abatement for improvement of existing structures. A lot of people think, because I've come into contact with this, that the abatements are just for new construction. They're not. They're also for improvements to existing structures. You don't really do a good job in the code defining what an improvement is or how significant it has to be. There is some information, but we always have the assumption that if you're going to be putting money into a property, you might as well apply for the abatement and have them tell you no.
Yeah, my only caveat would be if it adds value to the price of the building. So like framing, for example, new framing probably wouldn't do that because every house needs framing. But in addition to
windows,
even as small as a bathroom can
windows,
make
the roof, bathrooms, kitchens, an addition, all of that would qualify. That's also going to be a 10-year tax abatement. They have not, legislatively, that's not going to be touched. So improvements to existing structures will still get the 10 years, whether it's commercial, residential, or industrial. It has to be applied for within the same calendar year that the building permit was issued. So if it was pulled in 2020, it has to then get applied for in 2020. It's not one full year, it's within the same calendar year. You really want to keep an eye on it if you pull a permit in December, because it will still be due at the end of that month in December, even if it's technically, the 27th. Now, we've had instances where, is this where you're going to go into? We've had instances where they'll accept it a little later, but generally that's
Yeah, I would just say don't leave it up to their discretion. So make sure to, get it in that calendar year.
Yep. You always want to get these in on time. And this abatement, again, starts January 1st out after certification that improvements are complete. Again, tax clearance is required generally in the process. After you submit your application to OPA, they shoot it over to Revenue Department's tax clearance unit. So you might want to check ahead of time if you have any tax compliance issues, because that will hold up the approval. It should be hand delivered to OPA. It should not be mailed in, and you should bring an extra copy so you can get it stamped. Again, everything's through paper with OPA right now, so you want to be able to have an extra copy. And then the last final document that I always get asked, well, how do I know if it's done? You get this final document in the mail with a letter that says your abatement's been approved for this property, and they give you a certificate to commence a 10-year tax abatement. That has to be filled in by the owner, and they ask you for when the construction was complete, and that's the last document that has to get sent back. As Adam mentioned, if you still are have that right now, hold on to it and wait until OPA opens. And the last pointer is just it takes 12 weeks to get these processed. Generally, there's no technology around it. It's all kind of a hand-done process. So this, even though you have a longer runway on some of these, especially the improvements to existing structures abatement, you want to get them in as soon as possible.
Yeah, it can save you a lot of headaches.
Especially if you run into tax clearance issues and things like that.
Yep. So this is just a good, visual. All three of the tax abatement permits or licenses applications all look the same for the first two sections of this. That last page is really where it's going to explain the instructions, whether you're applying for improvement, new construction, or the 30-month developer abatement. So that's a good place to look, and you can look up there because it will state, which piece of legislation is kind of running this, and then, the things you need to remember. With this, we always have to, at minimum, include a copy of the building permit to go with it. Can just share,
not the plumbing permit, not the electrical
permit. Yeah, the building permit's all you need.
Permit.
That being said, if there are things, and we can get into more detail if people want to talk about it, but we get these a lot that come into our office and they're in error because, a lot of the building permit's not matching up to what you're saying you're going to get as far as improvement, because you do have to estimate the amount of abatement you're asking for. So, stuff like that, we can talk about how one can potentially supplement and get their application processed versus having to do an entire new application, because you can't actually, revise an application, but you can supplement.
So Rachel, I have a question. What happens if I don't file within 60 days?
So if you don't file within 60 days, the only way for us to get it reviewed so that you can get relief is, one, depending on the timeline, I would say. Sometimes we've been able to send them in if it's a week late or 2 weeks late or even 30 days late, especially if it's around a major holiday or something like that. If you're late, a year late or 6 months late or 3 months late, we have to file what's called a nunc-pro-tunc petition to the Board of Revision of Taxes, which is—
We were going over our Latin today, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like then for now is what it stands for. I think that's what it is. I did take Latin in high school, but that's not helpful. So time is of the essence. You don't want to wait a year or two. The second you realize you have an issue, we want to file this right away. We have to set out why we filed late. Generally, there's only two major reasons that the board will look at. If there was some emergency where your lawyer was driving it over to OPA and they got in a car accident or something crazy like that, generally I just didn't know when to file it doesn't work. Although I've said to people, sometimes it's worth trying it because you might end up in the same place. But if, sometimes the board can be sympathetic And again, it really depends on the circumstances. Keep in mind, it takes 6 months to a year to get in front of the Board of Revision of Taxes. So
Yeah.
it's not a quick fix. Go
And can I
ahead.
make one statement before you go through? I think one thing people don't know either is that even if this is basically just saying, if you do get a positive result from BRT, it's saying we are now allowing you to file on time. It doesn't mean though that your abatement is going to be successful if you don't have all that other stuff in line. So again, this is just allowing you to now file as if you filed on time. It is not necessarily a success.
Yeah. And to Adam's point, if you have any revisions or changes, sometimes people guess, hey, I think the renovations are going to be 200 grand. You get in there and they're 400 grand. There's ways to fix some of that. But to his point, this is just allowing us to now file it on time. So people will say to me, oh, well, I filed a building permit 2 years ago, and what if I just let it lapse and I file another one? Well, they keep record of all this, so they're going to be able to see when your last permit was pulled. Sometimes it can be a better argument as to why we may not have filed. I've had ones where a contractor switched in the middle, or the contractor went bankrupt and they thought they were handling. So depending on the circumstances, but generally you don't just pull a new permit and then they kind of let you move forward. Again, if you did a renovation and you didn't get an abatement, but then you're putting on an addition, you still can then try to apply for the addition that you did as long as you're in the time frame. So it doesn't preclude you from any additional improvements. Success rates for nunc pro tunc, it's a 50-50. I mean, sometimes it can be a crapshoot depending on what the facts and circumstances are. Again, your legal team should be very transparent with you about the timing of this, the success rate, and really understanding your fact set. Some of your other options in the event that your appeal is unsuccessful, you can always appeal your taxes if you can show that there are comps for a lower value with similar sized, similar located.
Yeah, and you're being kind on success rate. Our office tends to, but we also throw a lot out. So 50-50 is like, even for a great office, I think they say that it's like around 10%.
Yeah. The other thing is the homestead exemption, just really quickly. If it's a single family home or it's a condo and you live there, it's your primary residence, you're able to get the homestead exemption, which is a $45,000 reduction on the assessed value of property. I think it comes out to like $650 a year or something. That is a saving. So there are some other options.
Yeah, in lieu of an abatement.
And so our pro tip here is don't file late, and let us help you make sure you don't file late.
File late.
Yeah.
All right. I want to hear about housing rental license.
Yeah, we can do this pretty shortly, but every landlord needs to obtain a housing rental license when renting units, even if it's one unit. You need to have a commercial activity. There's only one case, really. You can get into nonprofits, but there's one case that's mostly going to apply, and there's an exception. That's if it's owner occupied between 2 and 4 units. So, typically you see that with somebody who's renting some rooms of their house that they also live in. Then you don't need a commercial activity license. But in order to get a housing rental license, you need that commercial activity license. And for that, you need to be, it kind of goes into those prerequisites. Need to be tax compliant. We've kind of already talked about that. If necessary, you need the zoning approval. It has to be, used in the way that you're saying it can be used legally. And then you have to have, with that commercial activity license, you have to have your Philadelphia tax account set up, because they will ask you when you're setting up your commercial activity license, and then when you're setting up your rental license, what's your EIN, or if you're just an individual, what's your social security number, and what's your Philadelphia tax account, which goes into your business income relief tax number, and also your net income, which is the NPT, net profit tax is what they call it. So you need that. You're also going to, need a certificate of occupancy, which we've already talked about. And then as far as other documents you may need, these are kind of things that's like to, keep your head above board. So you're going to want your certificate of rental suitability. You're going to need a lead paint certification, which is for properties that were built before 1978, which is most of them in Philadelphia. Smoking disclosures on properties of 3 units or more. And then there's a guidebook that the city's put together called Partners in Good Housing. all of that needs to be something that is available to your tenants, that they're able to see, because in the event, say you go for an eviction, you only have legal standing as far as you being also, legally compliant. So you can't just say if somebody stops paying you and you didn't have the, a fully renewed rental license, then you're not in good standing, and the case will get dismissed. One last thing to note on housing rental licenses that a lot of people miss is it's a renewable, and it's not automatically renewable, but you have to renew every year. So you have to prove those prerequisites again every year. You can get set up on a email that automatically tells you when to renew, but I do find a lot of people come to us not realizing that the rental license has lapsed.
And then I guess the last one's Airbnb.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think we can talk about for another day, especially in this climate right now. Things will likely change on that, but there are some limited lodging prerequisites you have to, prove in order to get that limited lodging.
I would just also quickly mention for the housing rental licenses, sometimes they'll ask you for a CO, but if you you just have a change of ownership, but no change of use and no additions or alterations to your structure, you just need to bring down your settlement sheet or show your settlement sheet. You don't need to now go get a full CO.
Yeah. And this is all being done in Eclipse right now. So it'll let you know what you have to actually submit with it, what's required versus what's optional in order to get through that license process.
Cool. I think the last certification, I can't say this word, I don't know why, is the property sale one.
Yeah, so we get asked this a lot. What's the difference between this and a use permit? A lot of times lenders will ask for either a use permit to show that the property can be legally used in the way that it's being sold, or what you can do is get a property sale certification, again, all through Eclipse, which Scott's going to go over in a minute. But the property sale certification is really helpful, especially when you have a property, let's say that's a triplex or a quad, was the last use permit on it's from the 70s. It's now zoned RSA 5, so it's technically a non-conforming use. If you were to go pull a new use permit, you'd trigger a variance. However, you can pull a property sale certification, which is actually the city certifying what the last and legal use is registered on the property. And as long as there is not a vacant property license or vacant structure license that supersedes it, meaning it was pulled most recently, then you're in good shape. So just know that anytime, even if you got a variance, if you put a vacant property license or a vacant structure license on your property, it wipes out that past use. It's also worth noting that vacant lots do not have a use on them. They're vacant lots unless you have to submit plans and go through the architectural process and the submission with L&I. Otherwise, the use is vacant. So I've had people say, "Oh, I have a vacant lot. Can I it's RM1 now. Can I go just pull a permit over the counter?" Yes, if you get plans for it, but remember that there's also some considerations as to when you have to start work and things like that. So this is just another option instead of messing your uses up.
Great. So the long-awaited Eclipse. Hopefully, some people have seen this logo. Eclipse is operational and is working. Whether it's working for you or not, hopefully we can help you out today and answer some questions. I think Scott's going to dive in, generally what's going on with Eclipse and who's on Eclipse, who's not on Eclipse, and maybe touch on even how we're using it internally at the moment.
Yeah, I'm just gonna briefly kind of talk about how Eclipse ties into everything. I think we wanted to give a broad overview of kind of permitting and what's required, because Eclipse doesn't change any of the requirements of permitting. It's pretty much the same system. It's just done digitally now. So 85% of the capabilities of physical submissions are currently working. There's a few agencies that aren't in Eclipse currently. The Historical Commission, survey districts, OPA, and Planning Commission are what those are. Survey districts are working. They're just not working through Eclipse specifically. OPAs, we talked about, still shut down. Planning Commission and Historic Commission hopefully will come online to Eclipse, I believe, and start working. I think they're just a little bit lagged to get there. Who can use Eclipse system? So Again, this is why we kind of, Adam was pretty hard on activity licenses and trying to get some of that stuff squared away because they're very important with this new digital system. And there's really no room to not be compliant in the city's way that they look at you. The main people that can be within Eclipse are design professionals, business owners, legal professionals, expeditors, contractors can all submit for permits. Within every submission, you have to link your own account and prove that you have obviously an activity license or trade license. And that's all verified that you're tax compliant to get those things, which is kind of where the tax clearances come in. So all those things are really important. You can also associate accounts with other professionals, which I know we do with Pritzker a lot, so all group. Basically, they give you an association code, and you can kind of link all those permits together so they show up on everyone's dashboard. Everyone has access, notifications,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. The home screen, as you see to the right here, is basically all the things that you can do through Eclipse. Activity license, business license, trade licenses, and then the permits and certificates kind of down there at the bottom. And then, it can kind of go into the various kinds of permits that you're looking to do.
One question I got asked yesterday, and it kind of applies, when we're submitting a project with an architect, we're linking the Pritzker Law Group over, so you have design professionals, legal professionals working together. But this also goes the same for contractors. So if you're building a project and you're the general contractor pulling a permit, you can also associate your trade. So you can associate your plumber, you can associate your electrician, you can get them all tied into that, so they can go pull their proper permits.
It's nice, instead of what we did before, which was have to call for status updates, we can now see right on the bottom, you can see in the picture, it says my activities, and it can kind of tell you processing or completed, things like that. So that's nice to see.
My new favorite one is going to be the subcontractor saying, "Oh yeah, I got the permit." Well, did you? Because now there's no hiding; it's right there. So it's a great, it's now becoming the city's communication tool for all of us real estate professionals moving forward.
Yeah, and even that, I mean, you don't even have a choice but to link your contractors. Like they require it, and they have to be in Eclipse to make sure that happens. They have to be tax clearance positive, which is also the case. So it's a good thing at the end of the day. It's just making sure that everyone's playing on the same field and can use the technology that way. Legacy permits can be linked into Eclipse. This question earlier, what is a legacy permit? So a legacy permit is anything that was not filed with Eclipse previously. So if you have a permit that was previously approved or there's additional information, was in progress previous to Eclipse, maybe you got the approval but didn't pay for it, you can link those permits with your Eclipse account and then track the progress, submit additional info, pay for your permits, all that really fun stuff. There's a jot form that's on the L&I's website that we can give out if anyone needs to find it. The one thing I will say is make sure you use the email address that is with your Eclipse account. If you don't do that, it won't get linked to the right Eclipse account, which obviously is problematic.
We might have experienced that already, but it works.
A few other just quick things to talk about with additional requirements that Eclipse is bringing, or just things that should have been done that weren't always done, that you 100% need done now, is PA one call numbers with any building permit submission. You have to put in specifically those numbers, and they check to make sure that they're accurate and they've actually been pulled. Sometimes that's a misstep and it got lost necessarily when things were paper. Residential permits, this is one of the bigger changes I've seen from typical permit submissions. There's a lot of needed information for these permits. And a lot of that gets into the nitty gritty of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, things that you need to kind of specify within. So if you're submitting one of these permits, I would definitely make sure your contractor or design professional is taking care of this and provides you with all the needed information. Just a quick highlight of the things that you're going to need are the cost of all the subcontracted services for mechanical, electrical, plumbing. You're also going to need to know the exact amount of plumbing fixtures within the house, what's being vented, the HVAC systems that are needed, electrical requirements like your panel services. There's a lot of additional things that we didn't typically use to fill out that are now being required for these residential permits. And the main reason is because they're not, they don't have MEP plans associated. So that's kind of the reasoning why they're making this happen.
So just putting the total construction amount required isn't enough anymore. Now you have to split it out.
Specifically for 1 and 2 family homes, yes, precisely. Special inspection agencies are also linked to the permit. So each agency is entered and also has to be within Eclipse and tax clearance as well. So it's something that's also different. We used to kind of just write the name on, and I don't know how much they used to check on them, but they definitely need to be linked, and each inspection needs to be entered for every project that is needed.
Cool.
Appeals to the Zoning Board of Adjustment can be filed on Eclipse. They're not being processed right now, so we've submitted a couple this week just to get them in the queue. It's a kind of a great feature too. You used to have to physically walk over to ZBA and file them, and they're taking payment right online. But again, they're not being processed. So as far as a date to get scheduled, that's not happening right now. And also it's important to note that, you know, the same prerequisite documents that you needed to file the appeal in person are still required. You know, the typical project information form, the refusal, the form, and your appeal application. And you do have the ability to select if it's accelerated or not. So that's great so far.
Other quick little minor thing, but something that again wasn't needed previously, was you must know what the earth disturbance is. And typically we talk about this when we talk about green roofs and stormwater and that kind of stuff. It's somewhat of a trigger, so I think that's why they're asking for it. But every project, every submission needs that number. So again, if you're submitting, you want to make sure that you get that from your design professional and or engineer on what that square footage is. And then just stupid little things that are kind of a little bit of a headache for us as professionals. All the drawings need to be divided into G sheets, which is the general sheets, architectural sheets, and structural sheets when uploaded. So you're going to start to see approved sets kind of all broken down into different areas. So again, important to ask if you know, your design professional is not submitting for a permit, that they make sure they do that for you, as well as there needs to be a 2-inch by 5-inch space in the left-hand corner for the digital approvals. And Brian, if you want to go to the next slide, we can show this beautiful area that is now designated in the drawings. So, I mean, it's literally just a box in the left-hand corner.
Where everyone stamps, right? They're all just putting their name.
Yeah, and not the
I think
greatest
they're-
spot in my opinion, but
Yeah, and I think Scott and Brian have showed that they're still working through getting their stamps to fit that space.
yeah, the street stamp doesn't really fit in there, to be honest with you.
None of the
yeah.
stamps fit there. They're all huge.
Well, the digital stamps are small enough now that they fit in that. The street stamp has not been adjusted yet.
Got it.
So we'll see. But I mean, usually they're just all over the place.
Mhm.
I guess it's good they're putting it in an area, but it's good if you had an architect or a design professional that had drawings in progress. Make sure they update this, because
Yes.
it's in such a weird spot that they're probably gonna have to readjust all their drawings.
Yeah, we've had some projects that are, you know, we're about to submit as a general contractor that we necessarily didn't do the architectural work for, but the drawings aren't to the standard to submit digitally at the moment. So we're having the architects have to go back and reformat everything and split the sheets correctly, things like that. So just something to be, you know, careful of if you have been submitting your permits and things like that and are planning on submitting it through Eclipse, just to save you some time, you know, so you don't get kickbacks. Cool. Just kind of want to do a summary real quick and then chat about what's happening next week. So just kind of, you know, recap, you know, we went over some permit requirements that are required for real estate. We talked about the prerequisites to those permits and even the prerequisites to the prerequisites, which was pretty exciting. I'm going to get it right. We chatted about certifications and the abatement. Also talked over housing rental licenses and what a property sale certification means and how that can help you in transacting real estate. And then just, you know, we gave a brief overview of the new Eclipse system and hopefully alleviated some, you know, questions you might have had on how it worked. And, you know, currently how it's tying into, you know, working with 85% of the city agencies. which is pretty much a good thing. If you have any questions, right now would definitely be the time to post them either on Facebook or right here in the Zoom chat. But just wanted to give you an update on what we're doing next week. So next week we have former Mayor Street coming on, John F. Street. He will be here. He's going to talk a little bit about how he sees the current city landscape, the proposed budget, and going to have an open Q&A session with us. Working with Mayor Street, we put together a little survey just on, people, even I'm taking it. It's just like, what do you know about the city and how it operates? And, we put out a survey that we're going to ask you to fill out, and then we're going to talk about it next week on the call live.
Yeah, and it'll be super helpful to drive the conversation, because if everybody, doesn't really have questions about one piece, then we'll kind of move on. You'll see, if you haven't before, our senior advisor and friend is a wonderful speaker and storyteller, and is also super knowledgeable, spending 30 plus years in Philly government. So he can really speak on anything and speak on it for a long time. So we want to dial it down and figure out what really people have questions about and where he can add value.
Cool. Cool. So I got one question here from Roderick. It says, hi, on the improvements, can you be more specific on what qualify as improvement under the existing permits?
So like improvements to real estate, we kind of went into it. Framing is not, but windows, roof, bathrooms, flooring, kitchens, additions, roof decks. And like I've said, you should submit and keep records of it and let them tell you that it doesn't qualify. If it's something where you put in a new light in the front of the house, maybe it would add value, but if it's not a high enough.
I always say to people, significant improvement, it seems like people used to come to us and say, yeah, well, we thought it was like you had to change at least 90% or something. Like, no, it's just like, think about, did this add value to your property? If that's the case, submit. And like Rachel said, let them tell you, you didn't get in, this is why. I think generally we can tell you, there are certain things that they won't accept, as what they consider value, because like all houses have it. But again, like updates, any update, I would submit through. Sometimes if it's so small that like the submission isn't worth your hour of time to do it, then don't do it. But or have a lawyer do it. But other than that, I think it's probably yes is usually the answer.
Cool. Patrice, I missed the first part. Will you leave out the presentation? Of course. For those that don't know, if you go to our YouTube channel for Design Blends, there's a playlist there, Pritzker Law Group XDB, that you'll see. It has all of our weekly calls on there, so you can review them. The one that I keep getting asked about is the one with Alan Dom that was 2 weeks ago now, so that is on there. So you can go take a look and rewatch them.
And just you can email us too if you need to. We'll send it over.
Cool. But I don't see. I just want to check Facebook one more time if there's any other additional questions. It's a light question week this week, so that's good.
Yeah, and I get that we kind of breezed. We didn't dive too. Believe it or not, we could probably talk on every single one of those slides for an hour. So I get that it was a lot of information, but we just wanted to touch over it. If people want us to really dive into one of them more, show how we go through something, just let us know. Cause I know like seeing, Scott talk about the 9 prerequisites can be a lot, but those are them. And we want to make sure that those are there. And then we can kind of get into how do you actually solve and figure out all those prerequisites individually.
Cool. Well, if we don't have any questions, we're going to end 9 minutes early today. Everyone buy back some email time, so that's good.
Yep, and shout out to Red Day for Keller Williams. I know it's their big international day of service, so we're participating, and I know a lot of other people are. Always a good event.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you next Thursday at 2:00.
Yep, thank you.